Everyone, it is about 2 minutes after 6. This is a meeting of the Durham Board of Appeals. I'll call the meeting to order. And then I think we'll start in deference to our member who retired, who always reminded me to do the pledge. Let's stand up and do the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, so I'd like to introduce the members. We haven't met for a while. We have a new codes enforcement officer, and so I think today, too, I will ask for a motion to allow our alternate, allow our alternate to vote so that we have 5 voting members. So, Heather, why don't you start, too, Alan, and just introduce yourself for...
I don't know how close we have to talk to this. My name's Alan Plummer. I started as code enforcement officer, settling in. It might take a few more months, but yeah, it's good. I came from Mechanic Falls, live in Chelsea right now, but moving to Litchfield.
I'm Heather Roy. I'm the alternate member, and I think I'll be voting tonight in place of Gary.
Terry Kirk, New Book Road. Been a member for a long time.
And I'm Barbara Schneider. I live on Rough Rider Road, and I serve as the chair. But usually I have Gary kicking me under the table, but not tonight. So
I'm Milt Simon. I live on the Stackpole Road, and I've been a member of this board just slightly less time than Terry.
Paul First, Chesley Hill Road. I'm a former associate member, and I was recently appointed as a regular member.
So I guess the first thing I'd like to do, too, is to have a motion to allow Heather to vote as a voting member.
So move. Second.
Okay, all in favor? All right.
You're
And-
in.
You're in. So in the audience, I think everybody can introduce themselves, and then what I'll do is turn this over to George, who will lay the groundwork for us. So why don't we start with you, Bertie?
Okay. I'm Elizabeth Fertig Bird. Everyone calls me Birdie because it's shorter. We live on Bowie Hill Road, 125. That's where we live and also where our tree farm is and wellness center. And we moved here how many years ago?
7 years ago.
7 already. Yes.
Great. I'm Jonah Fertig Bird, and I am married to Birdie and also live in the same place.
Hello, everybody. My name is Thomas Prohl. I live in Freeport out on Wolfsnack Farm, and I'm one of the worker owners with Jonah and Birdie at Celebration Tree Farm.
And Jane, you might as well introduce yourself.
I'm Jane Rice, and I also live on Bowie Hill Road, and I'm here because I have property and resource protection, and I'm just curious in the process.
Okay, so let me frame this. As I see this, it was submitted to us as an application for a variance, but really, it's more of a request for a district boundary line interpretation. So if you guys would take a look, just so that you know what our authority is, it's on page 159 of those new ordinances. It says, all the things that we can do, our powers and duties are in 17.3, and 17.3D says we can interpret zone boundaries as part of an appeal hearing at the request of a Board of Selectmen, Planning Board, or Code Enforcement Officer. So that's really what we're doing here, is interpreting boundaries. And as I see it, the issue is that the state mapping is different from what the town's mapping for floodplains are. So with that, we're not here, just so I get it, to talk about the project. That happens based on what we do at the planning board with conditional use permit applications.
Madam Chair, is it possible, or is there a record of the stop order?
Yeah.
That was issued by the former CEO? It was referred to, but we don't have a copy of it.
It's not pertinent to this request. That's pertinent to the land use ordinance or the planning board determination with what they'd like to go forward with.
Okay.
This request is only very narrowly about the resource protection zone.
Oh, I have a question related to that. My understanding from reading the application is that the letter was asked them to discontinue the use of the RV for glamping. Is that correct?
I believe so.
If that's
Yeah.
the case, then I would say it is relevant.
Okay, I don't
this
have that.
case.
I don't have that here
Okay.
today.
And just to speak to that briefly is that letter, which didn't provide with you, actually doesn't reference at all the resource protection zone, so it was not in reference to where it was located. That came up after in conversation, and so that's why we have come forward with this limited request to around the district boundary line interpretation.
Tell me what you're, before we go on, because I'm not sure, I think it's relevant, but I want to understand, Paul, why you do, so.
Sure.
if you-
Well, I don't really want to put the cart before the horse. I think we'll get there as we go through the meeting this
Okay.
evening. So, but I understand it's not there. My rationale is longer, and I really don't want to kind of get ahead of the applicant. For them
Okay.
to explain their application as well as the code enforcement
Sure,
officer.
fair, that's fair. Okay, so why don't we, I guess, tell us a little bit about why you're applying for this, and then we'll have George do some background for us, if that's
Yeah.
okay.
Great. Well, thank you for taking the time to hear this appeal and for being here tonight. I know everyone's busy. It's the middle of summer, so I really appreciate everyone's time this evening. And really what we're looking to do here is have our property reflect the accurate information from the state. When we saw the accurate information from the state that was put forward the town, we were supportive of that redrawing of the map because it reflects what we know on the ground, that the area right now that's in resource protection for the floodplain is actually high ground. It's incredibly dry right now, and it's well above the Garish Brook. And so when you look at the accurate information, it really reflects what we see on the ground, where the area that's surrounding the house and the barn is above the Garish Brook area. And really, we're talking about a very small area. It's roughly 23,000 square feet, so just over a half of an acre. And really want to be clear, like we're really committed to resource protection. We are a certified organic farm. We practice organic ecological forestry. And I've been committed to environmental issues throughout my life. So this is not about trying to in any way degrade the environment, but really just reflect the accurate information from the state. So that's really why we are coming here tonight. I mean, as you stated, yes, we do have some intentions to do some projects that we'll be putting forward to a conditional use permit, but that's not what we're here to talk about tonight, really. By moving forward with this this evening, then it allows us to submit that application and know where we can place things, but we're hoping to have this district boundary line reinterpreted to be accurate.
Anyone have any questions so far? Okay.
Hey, would you like to take my seat?
Or we can all move over one.
Yeah, there's a
Okay.
And I do want to thank George for just talking through it and talking about where these boundary lines are, and also helping with these maps as
And
well.
you should introduce yourself too
Yes,
for the
yes,
purpose.
I
Thanks,
will.
George.
For the record, I am
Yep.
George DeBarge, and I am the town planner for Durham. And this application is before you under an additional provision of your land use ordinance. In that additional provision, the one that you quoted, 17.3D, I think it was, refers to the general authority of the board to do different functions, but the specifics of carrying out the function of interpreting boundaries is found in Article 2, and it's in section 2.36 on page 3 of the land use ordinance. And that provision reads, where physical or cultural features existing on the ground are at variance with those shown on the official zoning map or in circumstances where the items covered by paragraphs 1 through 5 above are not clear, the Board of Appeals shall interpret the district boundaries. So that is the specific administrative provision that you are reviewing tonight as it reflects this application for appeal. And those prior provisions that it refers to are pretty much the basis on which zoning maps are drawn. And generally, the principle is that you want to make sure that wherever you put a boundary, that it's a discernible place, so that you can figure out whether you're subject to it or not subject to a regulation. And so generally, highways make very good boundaries. Typically, it's a center line. That's item A1. Boundaries following well-established lot lines construed. Thirdly, town lines. There's usually a marker, and they do what they call a perambulation every 10 years of the town boundary. Shorelines are pretty discernible and well used. And then boundaries indicated, number 5, as being parallel to features. And a lot of times you'll have 500 feet from a road or 1,200 feet from a road, one of those physical boundaries that you can determine. So again, measurements can be made to determine where the regulation stops and starts. So 6 says, where physical or cultural features existing on the ground are at variance, and this is a little bit confusing because the application is filed as a variance, and that's not the same kind of variance. This means they differ. The variance is a legal provision for getting relief from land use regulations, so they're two different issues. So I hope that won't muddy the waters here more than they already are. So it says where it's unclear where the actual boundary is on a property, the Board of Appeals has the authority. Many communities, most of the ones that I've worked with, it's usually the planning board that makes this determination, but in Durham, it's been assigned to the Board of Appeals, which is, makes as much sense because you are appealing something. So in this case, it's parallel to the Wildflower Equestrian Center on Royalsboro Road that came up just about a year ago, I think it was, where you had a very similar situation where a property owner wanted to get a conditional use permit. In that case, I think it was for a summer camp as part of their equestrian program. They wanted to have kids come, and the code officer reviewing it said it's in resource protection, and therefore you can't even apply for a conditional use permit because it's not a specifically permitted use. So in that case, the Board of Appeals, reviewed specific information, and part of your application is a set of maps, which I prepared. And this is based on, so this first diagram in their application shows the existing resource protection boundary as shown on that official zoning map. This is just a blow-up of overlay of an air photo, which I prepared using the GIS system that I developed for the town. The second shows, based on the FEMA floodplain, and you see the actual stream, you see the property lines don't exactly follow the hydrology of the stream, and so 100 feet from the brook on either side is also resource protection under the criteria. But this is a fairly narrow, steep topography associated with the stream down through here, so you don't end up with a lot of expansive wetland along the stream. So this floodplain mapping comes from FEMA, which was provided to the state of Maine, and the state of Maine basically provided that to towns all throughout the state to show where the accurate boundaries of the floodplain are. So in the Equestrian Center application, you basically used this best statewide available information to determine that the boundary on the zoning map was not accurately depicted and was unfairly restricting the property rights of the applicant. You went further than that, however. You said that's not physical ground feature or documentation thereof. In other words, the FEMA map shows the proximate location, but where is the actual location? So what is typically done, whether it's wetland delineation or floodplain delineation, you get a field professional, a surveyor or an engineer, to come out and shoot elevations, look at the flood maps, which typically give base flood elevations, and then they determine where that actual line is on the ground. And that was a condition of approval for the Wildflower Equestrian Center, and they went forward and got that documentation before the permit was issued. So that's basically what is being appealed tonight. It's not about Celebration Tree Farm. It's not about conditional use for camping. It's about where is the appropriate boundary line for the limit of the Resource Protection District.
I have a question about, why aren't we dealing with a shoreland zoning overlay district? The reason I ask that
Yep.
question is, on page 4, boundaries shall be defined as those on the Downing map, on the zoning map, and more specifically, all land areas within 100 feet horizontal distance of the normal high water line of a stream shown on the most recent, I mean, it only matters to the extent you need to then submit something to DEP if we're gonna change the zone. I
Okay,
just wanna
so-
be accurate.
So, yeah, and
It-
here's further confusion.
Okay. I'm not trying to be,
Yep, no, it's a very fair question, because
Okay.
that is one of the criteria.
right,
So, of Durham, under Maine DEP rules, okay, so this is the zoning map, and the only areas in Durham that are required by law to be governed by shoreland zoning, which is Article 9 of the ordinance,
right,
to within 250 feet of the Androscoggin River,
right,
within 250 feet of the normal high water mark of Runaround Pond.
right,
And then there are certain stream segments, Dyer Brook to where it divides, this is Dyer Brook here, I'm sorry, wherever you have the convergence of two perennial streams, and so on, this is not Garish Brook, this is Pinkham Brook, no, that's Meadowbrook, Pinkham Brook, I'm sorry, I apologize, I'm getting a brain cramp on that. Newellbrook, this is Newellbrook Road, got it.
right,
Okay, so, under DEP rules, this Newellbrook from this point where these two converge,
right,
Dyer Brook, those are required to be in shoreland zoning protection. Durham has gone beyond the state requirements to extend it on all of these streams farther than DEP requires. So I think that language only, as far as DEP rules are concerned, and this has been a real confusion for prior code officers. Do I go by the town's regulations, or do I go by the DEP regulations? And so the answer is they have to go by both, but they only have to apply DEP rules within DEP areas of jurisdiction.
So, but for accuracy purposes,
Yeah.
I mean, for the town, this is shoreland overlay.
Yes and no, but in any case,
Okay.
as far as that provision
Yep,
that you just read, about
Yep.
100 feet,
yep,
there is, the resource protection along here, and we're over here, does extend, you can see the dark green,
Right.
100 feet from the edge of the brook.
right.
Yep.
So I guess, I don't, I mean, it has the same impact, because if we take it out of resource protection or take it out of resource protection with shoreland overlay, the impact going forward is exactly the same. I would rather term it right.
Yeah, well, my concern here is that I'm concerned about getting too far ahead
No.
of the legislative body
Right,
because of the last town meeting. And at the last town meeting, the voters didn't accept the proposed changes to the resource protection area. And they, basically what I heard, the sentiment seemed to be that they wanted to see the new conservation areas approved at the same time that they removed the old ones, at the same time that they incorporated the old resource protection into shoreland, or, because who knows? They may decide, okay, we don't want just the shoreland zone, okay? We want to have other additional resource protection areas because we know these areas that are in the old floodplain map area, that these have been conserved areas for the past many more than 20 years. And so, that's the sentiment that I heard. And so I'm concerned about setting a precedent, and which could apply town-wide, when those deliberations haven't really happened yet, when that hasn't happened yet. And I understand that the applicant is kind of feel caught in the middle by that, and that process may be proceeding too slowly for them. But I am concerned about this because it's really a town-wide issue. It's not just an issue for this applicant. And George was asked, I believe at the last hearing, or encouraged to take this issue to the town at town meeting, and he did. And they spoke. And they basically said, no, we're not ready for this yet. So I have some concern about preempting this and getting too far ahead of things before that dust settles and those decisions are made.
And I had the same concern, knowing what had happened at town meeting. I understand the kind of argument, I understand what the ordinance empowers us to do, but it unlike Wildflower, which occurred before the town meeting, so we didn't have the sense of the body. Now we do.
Right.
And so will we be looking at, is this the right way to handle those changes, right?
We're kind of making a decision for the town in a way.
Exactly.
Because we're saying we're going to take floodplain, or we're just going to draw this back to the shoreline zoning area.
Right.
I mean, we have to base our decision on something.
Right. Yeah.
And I feel that we would be making the decision.
Right.
for-
And that's why I asked, because I'd feel, it's talked about as being resource protection, that hatch mark, but is some of it shoreland zone? And
Right.
in Durham's ordinance, it would be.
No,
No?
the green is the 100 feet from the brook.
Right, but no, this one. In other words,
It's within that.
the 100 feet from the brook is shoreland, would be resource protection shoreland zone under the town's ordinance, because it's 100 feet from the brook.
Yeah.
And it doesn't change what we call that 100 feet, whether it's shoreland
Yep.
zone overlay or just resource protection.
Yep.
That doesn't have an impact on what happens going forward.
Right.
It only has an impact on how we articulate what we've done. I just want to get it right if we're going to do it. To say we are going to reinterpret the boundary at 100 feet, and it's rural residential outside the 100 feet, and it's resource protection with shoreland overlay within the 100 feet.
Yeah. Could I make just one point of clarification on what you shared, Paul? And that is the implications of any decision you make on this application on the rest of the town. We discussed this back with Wildfire at the same time, because I was proposing it at the time and the town hadn't spoken. And we determined, and I think the state law will support, any appeal from this applicant only applies to this property. So any relief that you give here has no implication on any other property other than the same effect that passing the Wildflower Equestrian has. They are comparing their situation, but it's not like any other property owner all of a sudden now can get permits. They have to go through the same appeal process. So I just wanted to clarify that.
That's fine, but George, you did start your introduction by discussing how, in a way, and I don't think you specifically used the word precedent, but that we've already seen this similar case, and we've
Yes.
already handled it.
Oh, it does definitely have precedential
So
value.
it does have
Absolutely.
precedential value.
But I just wanted to clarify,
Yeah.
someone would have to go through this same process on a
Of course.
case-by-case basis. I just wanted to
And
clarify.
their flood maps may or may not allow, what they present, or what the GIS would show, maybe the floodplain isn't, 100 feet, maybe
It may be
it's
more,
more.
it may be more expansive on another
Right.
property.
So I have to ask the
Yeah.
question, do you really want to open Pandora's box? Or do you want to leave it closed until the town is able to do its due diligence and come up with a solution?
That's a good, I mean, others?
I have a question, George, maybe you can answer. I think that I remember correctly that at the last planning board workshop, or maybe it was a select board meeting, I apologize, that this issue is set to go before the town again in April. Is that correct?
The select board have asked us to prepare amendments combining the two different parts, correcting inaccurate mapping within the existing district, and at the same time as a separate warrant article, adding new resource protection based on the same criteria. So all that has happened is the select board has given direction to town staff to proceed in supporting the boards in preparing the amendments.
With the intention of it
But
being.
no warrant articles have been drafted.
Okay.
That's what I just want to clarify.
Okay, yep, but, so do
A
you,
little early.
do you think that it will be ready in time for April?
Mhm.
You do, okay.
Yep.
I have other questions too, but I'll
Yeah.
let other people join the conversation.
Terry?
I kind of agree about the precedent. I don't like the idea of setting a precedent and then next week, next month, we're here and they're too, well, they got theirs, why can't I get mine? Okay? Then are we throwing favoritism?
I mean, if in fact, you know, in my mind, I mean, it's a tension because they're not, this application, just like Wildflower, just like any we'd have to get, is gonna have to submit evidentiary basis for redrawing any boundary or reinterpreting any boundary. They can't just say, well, I want out now without submitting something that will justify, you know, relying on a new map, right? It's not like you can just come up and say, well, they got 100 feet, why can't I?
Yeah.
You're gonna have to show the mapping.
Yes, and here's my concern there.
Yep.
My concern, and I think George very astutely pointed out, that ordinance is usually associated with zone boundaries are often associated with a cultural or some type of physical feature on the ground that allow you to determine where the line is. And so in this case, my question would be, what would that be? So if you said it's the floodplain, and we know this is out of the floodplain, I know that I believe that the old maps were drawn to coincide with the old floodplain boundary. And that may be stated somewhere in an old comp plan. It's nowhere in ordinance. Basically, ordinance defines the resource protection zone as the lines drawn on the map. So I think it's somewhat arbitrary to say it's the floodplain because, I'll say it's a little less than arbitrary, but there's nothing really saying anywhere that floodplain equals resource protection. And then in terms of the shoreland zone, the town can have resource protection areas that aren't part of the shoreland zone, and we currently do. So what would we base it on? Where would you draw that? What would you base the location of the new line on?
Well, in reference to your point, there's no basis of determining, if you go to the 2002 comprehensive plan and you look at the floodplain map that's in there, it's virtually identical to the green that's on that map.
Yeah.
And pretty much everything else is within that, but that 2002 floodplain map of that comprehensive plan, in 2004, the zoning map was adopted that took that map and put it on the zoning map. So I think there is a basis for assuming, based on the public record,
Yeah.
that boundary is based on floodplain.
But there's nothing in ordinance. Ordinance says the lines are to be interpreted as the lines drawn on the map.
Yep. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why they're here tonight, because it is.
Right, right.
I'm not sure how this process goes, but if I could speak, yeah, just first of all, hear your concerns, and I mean, as I said before, like, I mean, I have a deep passion around conserving the environment. We have an adjoining 110 acres that we're leasing that's now owned by a land trust, and that land trust is holding that land in perpetuity, so that's preserved and not developed. And so, while it's not in resource protection, it is now owned by a land trust. We are practicing ecological practices, and as I think, again, right now the land we're talking about is less than a half, or just about half an acre. I understand the Pandora box. I mean, and definitely every time you make any decision, right, anything can result from that. I think with that said, this is, you can make a decision on each thing that comes before you based on the merits of it, based on, what's being proposed and what the intention is around that. And I feel like, again, this, if you go to land, you walk the land like I have, every day, you can really see this is high ground, and it goes, exactly where this map shows, the accurate map shows, is where the land goes down to the brook. And the area very steeply down to the brook. And, so there's a real, it's not just, it seems like this is where this is accurate information. And, so really trying to, again, go with this accurate information. And, I think every time you would have anyone, if anyone came before you, first of all, they have to go through a process to get scheduled. They have to get the information. It's not like, this decision will then open the floodgates of people coming before you. But even if they did, you have to, you make the decision. And I think you can make a decision on each individual parcel based, again, on the accurate information. And
Can I ask a question? Am I allowed to speak?
I don't know if John
I'm- I-
finished yet.
Yeah, that was all I had to say. Yeah.
Do you guys are okay with public comment? There's no real process? Sure. Can you come up so that you're heard, Jane? And introduce yourself for that. Yeah.
Jane Rice, Bowie Hill. So my question would be, and maybe I'm understanding this incorrectly, but it sounds like by your expertise of walking the land and knowing the land, you're saying that it is high ground, and I'm assuming that you as a group are supposed to be accepting that as the word, but did I hear that Wildflower had to do a delineation map prior to the actual process of, I thought I heard that come out of your
The
mouth.
board approved it as a condition of approval. And before a building permit was issued, they had to provide that documentation. But the board made the decision before that field analysis was done.
But their plan is not a building, it's a temporary
Yeah.
conditional, so that kind of slides under the radar there. So I guess I would kind of agree that you're opening up a Pandora's box, because I'll be next in line coming out and saying, I want my land out of resource protection if I don't have to pay to have a delineation map and just, where's,
Oh, we would.
Yeah.
We would absolutely, I would propose that if we were to approve this, we would ask for a survey to mark this on the ground.
Yeah. And
If-
we're complete.
If we were to do that. And so as a condition to apply for a conditional use permit, we could require that this more recent floodplain map be marked on the ground so that anything happens on the other side of it. But I'm not saying we're gonna do that. I'm just saying, if that would be the equivalent of what we did in the Wildflower.
But I'd have to ask, why are lands put into resource protection? For what reasons? they may be put into resource protection for different reasons. One may be floodplain. One may be, it could be a deer wintering area. It could be threatened or endangered wildlife habitat. It could be, there's a whole host of reasons. And that decision wouldn't speak to any of those things.
Right.
And that's why, in my opinion, that boundary should be, will hopefully be determined with due diligence, taking some of these other things in mind and not just saying, okay, well, this is the new flood zone area. And at least, and that's what I heard at town meeting. That's what I heard at town meeting. So, I will, and with that, I'll be quiet because I probably spoke time.
Those were the points that I was actually gonna make, that Paul just made about, because some of the meetings at town meeting, some of the comments that were made were that the map that was done at a level 6 versus at a level 4, and that would include more criteria. And so when I'm looking at this map that shows this green, one of my questions was going to be, I see that it says 100-foot stream buffer and that it says 100-year floodplain, but then none of those other criteria are checked. And so without those being represented on this map, I don't feel like we can look at this picture and we can look at this picture and determine whether or not it is resource protected, because it doesn't include any of those things that he just alluded to.
And I kind of feel like that decision is usually made by planners and committees in reflection of the whole town in context. What are our important areas? Not just drilling down to this one area. We don't really have the full context to say, this belongs in resource protection or it doesn't.
Nope.
Just getting down to some basic things. I question how this board would make a decision based on a proposed zone versus an existing one. It's the proposal, as was just mentioned, proposal was voted on at a townwide meeting, was voted down. I don't see how we can listen to an appeal on something proposed, but we can only, I believe the decision has to be based on something that exists. And that this, I think that they're jumping the gun, knowing that this will probably come forward again next April, and will hopefully get voted, differently. Then the appeal probably wouldn't be necessary to be able to move forward. But I don't see how we can vote on something that's being proposed if it's not, in fact, on paper.
Yes, I wanted to know whether the delineation was gonna had to be done or not, because that would prompt me to either move forward or not move forward. If they got away with not doing a delineation, I would jump on that bad.
I think every member
So,
of this
I'm
board
just saying.
feels like a delineation would be necessary.
There would be no basis not to, if we were to approve a different interpretation of what the resource protection boundary is. We need to be sure we would want it delineated on the ground. But that's kind of, you don't get there until we decide we're in a position to interpret the boundary. In effect, I'm hearing it's substituting one floodplain map for another floodplain map. That's what that's the assumption for the application. And what we're missing is, are there other bases for that being in resource protection?
Is there information about that, other bases for it being resource protection? I'm just interested to know how it got there, I guess, because I don't know that information, and what I'm, again, kind of understanding that this redrawing is a more accurate redrawing of resource protection. But
or a floodplain.
You seem to know.
It's probably floodplain.
It's floodplain.
George is right.
Okay.
But that determination was made also more than 20 years ago. So, things may have changed in 20 years also. I don't know. I really can't speak to that, but, I will say, I noted that also when I moved to town and I did a little GIS right out of grad school. I did a little GIS analysis. And I found out that the town doesn't have a shoreland zone. A shoreland zone was never approved by the state. A shoreland zoning ordinance was never approved by the state. It was imposed upon Durham. This was like back in 2006 or something. And I noticed that, you know, what George is saying with the floodplain, and it does look like it lines up. But that was also, you know, quite a long time ago. So, you know, I don't, that was the basis then, but is that the basis now? And, but, you know, but I guess the townspeople have asked at town meeting that they'd like to weigh in on this, and they'd like some more thought given to how those boundaries are determined, how the new resource boundary is determined. And they'd like to see the new boundaries laid out at the same time this is taken away. That's my understanding. And I don't know what that all includes with regard to, you know, some of the more agricultural areas and those kind of things. I don't know all the details there, but that's what I took from it.
George, can you explain for example, on the mapping that was done, when there was an option to check waterfowl habitat, or those are or aren't necessarily embraced in our own town's definition of resource protection, or are they?
Waterfowl, moderate to high value waterfowl and waterbird is a criterion in the ordinance right now.
Okay.
There are 5 of those in town. Most of them are within other parts of resource protection. They're really large emergent wetland areas which can be stream associated. And so I checked off the ones that hit this property.
Got it.
The ones that are not checked off did not hit this property.
Can you show me, I'm trying, is it here?
What, this,
This property?
yeah,
Sorry.
yeah, at this scale, it's very hard.
I think-
No, this is Swamp Road, so it's right down here. And the orange of this is the critical rural areas.
Mhm.
The orange is agricultural land. The green is the different resource protection criteria.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So, and
Yeah.
on the larger map, I'm
You're right there.
right there. Yeah,
Much easier.
yeah.
Does this exist big,
Yes.
like in this room?
Not in this room, but I think in this building. And I don't know whether I can get into the vault where I think it
Okay.
is.
How about right behind?
Behind you, George?
How about
Let me
right-
take a look.
What about right behind it?
Let me see, I think that's just an older version, but let me
Is it?
check. Yeah, that's the older.
Oh, that's the older version?
With a
Okay.
different parcel base,
Yep.
but if you keep going, it's also
Right, that's,
the version the same, there it is.
is that it?
That's the one you're looking at, Heather. And we are right.
Right here, Bowie Hill, there's Garrett, we're
yeah,
right there.
Yeah.
Right?
So
That's-
we're right here. Yeah, that's it.
That side of it or that side of it?
It's this,
Right,
it's this semicircle. right
So
there.
that's also tricky because this says resource protection is
Mhm.
the green,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But this one breaks it down
Yes,
into the
and this
different.
one also has,
yeah, the wildlife habitat.
it isn't as broken down as this is, but it's the same map.
That's just, yeah, the only thing that has is
Has the
existing
farm- it
commercial
has the- it has the
agriculture and
farm-
open fields.
Yeah, it has a farm
It ha-
on top of it.
That's
too.
all it has different, it
Yeah,
doesn't
It
have,
actually isn't exactly the same, but it's very similar.
right, it doesn't have co-occurrence habitat value.
This is one of those waterfowl breeding habitats that I was
Right.
telling you about here.
Right.
There's another one here.
That's Maha, no, yeah, that's there. This is Bowie Hill, okay,
Yeah.
got it.
There are 5 of those waterfowl breeding areas. There's one here, there's one along Meadowbrook here, there's one over here, and I think there's a couple in the runaround pond area.
So that looks pretty close, if anyone wants to take a look at that.
I guess my concern there would be, so, should that duty fall to the appeals board to decide what should be in resource protection and what shouldn't be? That's, I just, it seems like that's a townwide question. That should be a townwide question.
And I mean, I agree that it should be a townwide question, and I mean, here we're talking about just a small piece of the town. So I mean, just over half an acre. So that's, I mean, if I was coming before, yeah, if it was a big piece of land, I would say I totally agree with you. I mean, and I think as we think about, I think it's really important for us overall as a community to be thinking about how do we conserve more land. I grew up around here. We all have seen how much land has been developed and been, just down the road from us. There is a big subdivision. I'm assuming that wasn't in resource protection, but we have more and more subdivisions, more and more development. I'm not saying I'm against that development. At the same time, just have seen how farmland, has been eaten up by, houses all over. And I'm, being a farmer, working with farmers, just the importance of keeping more land preserved. I totally agree with that. Not at all, in any way trying to, object to that. And I mean, my other work, I do a lot of work around supporting that farmland protection and land trusts. So I don't disagree with that sentiment at all. And just here again, it's a very small piece of land that's is surrounding our house and our barn. Where we have kind of the core functions of what we're trying to do as a farm, and that we are there on the ground observing, knowing. I mean, it's not endangered species habitat, it's not deer habitat, it's not waterfowl habitat, it's not floodplain, it's not any of those aspects. I mean, and I understand the town process, yet at the same time also just this map, and totally would go ahead with a survey as well, support that. We didn't do that ahead of time because we didn't want to spend a lot of money to waste that money. We want to make sure that we were doing following what you would want to see, so we can make sure that we have an accurate survey. I would hope that anyone that would come before you would not do this just hey, we just want to do whatever, and so hey, we're going to pull this out of resource protection. No, I think it's important that we do that due diligence to make sure that we are keeping our resources in this town preserved, and again, just trying to have this reflect what this accurate, both what the state has issued and what we observe, living there.
Could you and Alan explain for us, under the current zoning regimen, how it's set up currently, what's precluding you from doing what you want to do? What are you precluded from doing now that you would like to do under the new zoning?
Yeah, that's, what we,
Campground.
what we did, well, we're not looking to really, what we're looking to do is one campsite.
Yes, and if you could stop there for 1 second. Now, I look at the definition of campground in the ordinance, and a campground is two or more parties.
Yeah.
But primitive recreation is allowed, and you are allowed, my interpretation is you would be allowed to have an RV, for example, with something that's mobile with wheels on it, if it's registered, and use that for glamping or camping as primitive recreation. But the code enforcement officer might, of course, that's the person who makes that determination.
I
would
don't
have to agree
think,
with that.
I don't think it has to be registered because it's not on the road. So registration is required to be on the road. If they're keeping it in one spot, it doesn't need to be.
It isn't in the ordinance, though.
But it would need wheels, which it does have.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. Yeah, I'll leave that.
I mean, yeah, and hey, if we can do that within the zone, we're we're happy with that. I mean, and that's honest. I mean, that's one of the things there. I mean, we have this. We're looking to build an educational facility, a small non-residential educational facility. It's
But
currently
that's-
right on. Yeah, I mean,
Right.
that can
And
be
that-
moved.
You can do that, right?
Move slightly.
That can be done in small, that's 40, land use 44, that can be done in resource protection and in shoreland zone.
Yeah, and I gotta say, I look at that, that makes total sense in today's world. When you look at all these things like, Tenter,
Yeah.
and all these things, this movement towards individual campsites on properties, that the ordinance does define a campground as 2 or more parties. That one could have one site. That makes sense.
But that's, it, I mean, the question would be, if you're contented to just have one RV site and no other tent site, I mean, if all you would ever have is one RV and no other tents going along with that, but that,
Yeah, I mean, that's what we're trying to do.
That's what we're here for.
I mean, a campground is any area or tract used for temporary overnight accommodation with or without shelter by 2 or more parties. But, once, if anyone pitches a tent, then you're outside.
Unless it's the same party.
Yeah, unless it's the same family, right.
Oh, okay.
So just to make sure that we're covering all the bases, then my question would be, and I'm not trying to do the merits of this, I know this would go before the planning board potentially. Would it be considered a home-based business? Because if we're looking at resource protection, home-based business is a no.
Well, that's a really good question, but then I have to ask the question, well, what if you were a Maine guide and you were taking people hunting on your property? Is that a home-based occupation? I don't think that would meet the test of a home-based occupation
That's,
by anyone. And I think this is more of primitive recreation, rather, I see this as more of primitive recreation rather than a home-based business.
right. And the way I would look at that too, Heather, is when you have a specific land use, that would trump a more general. In other words, there's a specific provision for campgrounds. So that specificity trumps a general home-based business that isn't specifically set out in the ordinance. Once you have a specific, that's just an interpretation thing.
That's a really good question.
Yeah, I mean, so it's not like a home-based business would be something not covered elsewhere in my mind. But primitive recreation do not require buildings or structures. So, but a structure, what's the composting toilet? Does that create a structure? The wash station? That's,
Are you
yeah.
going to have a campsite without a toilet?
No, you have to. I mean, you have to.
And the wash
Right,
wash station.
Right, you have to.
Yeah.
And so,
What are the rules
Maybe
around
put it on
resource
wheels, I don't
protection
know.
as it relates to like a leach field? Are those things?
They're allowed.
They are allowed, okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say too that we can position the wash station and outdoor shower outside of the zone.
Yeah.
I mean, we'd want a composting toilet near it, but again, that can be on a structure that's not, in ground and not, just a temporary structure. We actually could even do just a pop-up tent thing if, that was better.
Is there something similar to a wetland delineation for all of the other things that meet the criteria for resource protection? Like how we would be wanting a wetland delineation done, but then is there a service like that
Yeah.
measures the criteria of all of the other parts of resource
It's
protection?
really expensive.
Okay.
You have to get a wildlife scientist to come out and, look at your land and say,
this is what's living here,
This
this
is
is. And because the town hasn't really adopted ordinance criteria that explains
Yeah.
what is it
What
What
is
is it,
resource
resource
protection?
protection?
What is
We
it?
haven't defined
Yeah.
what resource protection is in this town. We've just created a map that says this is what it is, this is where it is. We haven't created, there's nothing that shows the criteria that the town has looked at, other than the
Yeah.
comprehensive plan,
Right.
but that's not got the force of ordinance.
Can I ask another question?
Sure.
The glamping RV, is that on your property or the land trust property?
That's
Our
ours. Yeah.
property.
Yeah, I mean, what we're talking about here is all our property.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, I guess I look at it from the perspective of, since we don't know exactly how this is going to be defined yet, maybe it would be best just to leave it alone until it's defined, rather than making a guess at what it's going to be, if these guys can do what they need to do without,
But why would they
trying
have
to make
given
a
him
change.
a letter
I would
saying
love to
that
know
it's not?
why we got
The-
that letter.
Yeah, I mean, the letter was, not based on the resource protection
Nope.
zone.
Sometimes letters, they're not always right, They don't always take into, ordinance is complex.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that, it took into account important factors. Did it take into account all the factors? Of course, we don't know. We haven't seen it.
So I would like to say, knowing that there was a cease and desist order, as a new code officer coming into a town, I'm not going to reverse that within my first 3 months of being here, because that would be a bad situation. Looking at it, I've talked to Jonah about that specific, and I've been to the site. Other than the resource protection area, I've talked to him about some specifics that I would want to see if he were going to start that operation up again. I would need to see underground electricity up to NEC code. I would need to see where the septic is going to be disposed of. I would need to see some kind of safety for carbon monoxide or smoke detection for sleeping areas. So with those things, there are other things that are allowed in Durham that I've come upon that lots of towns don't allow, but they're allowed here. They're doing it, and there doesn't seem to be anyone bothering them, and I can't see anything that's prohibiting them in any of the rules.
I think you'll find throughout Maine, in many towns, they allow people to park RVs and enjoy, the
Staycation?
enjoy the outdoors. Yes, in resource protection areas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
And if it wasn't a commercial venture, there are lots of people camping these days.
Lots of
There are
people
lots
camping.
of relatives camping.
But it's not a campground.
It's
I'm not sure if it's technically commercial.
Correct.
I'm not,
It's not-
because, it's one. It's
Yeah.
one.
Yeah.
And you can't stop a family from having a campground in their backyard, and their cousin comes there for any number of weeks. And that's happening on a very large
Oh,
scale.
yeah.
Yeah.
Very large.
I mean, the other thing that, the other land use that's permitted in resource protection and in the shoreland zone overlay is public and private parks and recreational, and that's funky because it's like a weird language, involving minimal structural development, use 36. And that's permitted.
Yeah.
So that would,
Exactly.
that's, how, and so is the small, non-residential facilities for educational, scientific, or nature
yeah.
interpretation
Yeah.
purposes.
Yeah.
So both of those things are permitted. So if the only reason anybody thinks that needs to be removed from the resource protection / shoreland overlay is that campground, and if there's,
Or the RV.
or the one RV,
Yeah, they're not saying a campground.
you don't need, because the plan, we don't have to reverse the stop work order because no one's appealed that. But if that's the only reason to come before us,
Right?
and you think the town can do something differently so that you have an option down the road for more tent sites or multiple parties beyond the two,
Uh-huh.
right?
The one.
No, campground is two, right. beyond the
Campgrounds.
one.
Oh,
It's
the
two.
campground definition.
Yeah,
Two
camp-
or more.
2 or more.
Yeah, the zoning may change
Right.
automatically in
It's-
April. Yeah.
It's two,
Or if you still felt, another kind of avenue, and, this probably doesn't sound very appealing, but another avenue is always to request a zone change and for that to be, and ask the selectmen to put it on the warrant at town meeting. I know in a lot of towns, that's what they do. If you're asking if you want a zone change for a
Yeah.
specific purpose, you put it on the warrant and let the legislative body decide, where they willing to grant it or not.
Which could happen apart from the larger
Yeah,
resource
because we're
protection
really in the
discussion.
business of
Yeah.
interpreting boundaries, but we're not really in the business of making approving zone changes.
So confused.
It's not- what are you confused? I mean, what we're saying is that if all you want is to have one party in one RV, you can do that
You can do that now.
now.
Yeah.
You might need a conditional use because it's not a campground.
It's not a campground.
It would be, but then it might, if it's not a campground, then it might be the home business that would need the conditional use.
Yeah,
In-
again, I would argue,
It's
well,
just
what about a main
educational-
guy?
Right.
Are they, do they have a home business? This is primitive recreation.
There is
Yes.
criteria for the home-based business that's laid out, and if you can say yes, right, George, you can say yes or no to those questions, is whether
Oh,
or
yeah,
not
yeah,
it
yeah.
falls into that.
Maybe we should look at that.
I don't think it's, I don't think it's primitive recreation, because it's recreational uses that do not require buildings or structures. And what you're trying to do.
It's not a building or a structure.
But the RV isn't, but the other things around it are structures.
Like?
It also says under primitive recreation,
Yeah, that's not-
such
that-
use do not include the use of all-terrain vehicles, motorized bikes, or other motorized vehicles on wheels.
An RV.
Oh, yeah, okay,
Yeah.
good question. Is it motorized or is it a trailer?
It's a converted bus, so it has a motor.
Has a
But
motor.
It doesn't work.
Yeah.
You can't turn it over.
I mean, I think this is not the same as a man guide that puts, a tent site near a hunting field.
Well, I'll tell you, the main guide today, they probably aren't using a tent site. They're probably using an RV out in the woods.
Right, but,
Yeah.
but I think that,
Do you wanna read the definition or the section of home-based
What do you-
business?
what do you
It's on
need?
I
page
think we're
21.
going beyond the scope of tonight's meeting.
well, we are and we are and we aren't, in that I think to say, yeah, we're not gonna reinterpret, we don't have to reach a decision on anything if they can go ahead and do what they want to do with the
Right.
conditional use permit. So, in other words, we don't have to have a vote if they don't need the resource protection zone redefined.
I think the question is it a home-based occupation or not? In terms of them being able to do it now, and
Right.
again, we're getting into Alan's area.
No, that's,
And,
that's right.
And what I guess I'd have to ask, what does Alan think? What does the code enforcement officer think? With regard to that aspect of it. What do you think, Alan? Do you see this as a home-based business or something else?
I think they're operating it as a business. I would think you are operating it as a business. Are you not?
Yeah. I mean, it's part of it, yeah.
That's part
Yeah.
of, yeah.
It's
Subsidizing.
educational, is that?
Educational.
Profit?
It's
You will
education.
not find
That
any
changes
farmers
scope.
who are not doing some side hustle in real estate to subsidize the farmer.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty common right now,
Yeah.
yeah, to,
Which
for-
allows us to then hire wreath makers and local staff and
Yeah.
other
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
It's
They
more
need-
important than it seems on face value.
Whether it's a home-based business or not, it still needs it needs the conditional use permit for the small, non-residential facilities for educational, scientific, or nature interpretation purposes.
But those are outside of the resource protection zone too.
No, those are allowed in resource protection.
Right, but it's also, they have them mapped, those facilities are mapped as outside the current resource protection area. So they're mapped as being.
right on the edge, yeah.
It's
Right on the edge.
Right on the edge,
Yeah.
but they would need that.
Yes, Exactly.
And that's, I think that's more specific than home-based business. Home-based business
Oh,
would
yeah,
not
yeah,
be
yeah.
allowed, but
Right.
this would be allowed.
Yep.
That's the criteria under which they'd apply for a conditional use permit.
Yeah.
So again, home-based business is more general, this is more specific.
Okay, good point, yes.
So, I mean, yeah, we could apply for
So
this.
that's why, to get to Milt's point, that's why I think we talk about this, because we could say, we don't have to make a decision. Or in other words, we would deny it because it's not a needed thing to accomplish what they want to accomplish.
Yes, right. Yeah.
I mean,
So-
that.
You can't speak for
yeah.
the planning board,
Yeah.
though. I mean, seriously,
Well,
right?
yeah, I would say, we have our conditional use permit prepared to submit tomorrow. So really I was waiting on this meeting. I mean, I think that having the information from what you all shared tonight, that, based on, it feels like we could move forward. I mean, we were, moving forward with the small non-residential educational facility for the yurt, but then also having that one site, which is not a campground, being a component of that small non-residential facility, makes sense to have that as, how
Oh,
we
yeah,
move
because it's
forward.
allowed in the zone.
Yeah. And-
No.
Yeah, I mean,
exactly.
and then,
Yeah.
we don't
Right.
open up the Pandora box you're worried about.
We're in the
but-
zone.
All right, yeah.
And it,
But then you need a, if you put a yurt up with another bathroom, is that another building? Would that go under the educational?
The yurt is
Yeah.
educational,
Because
I
it's
mean, it's
not a
educational
residence.
facility.
it's non-residential, so a yurt for having a class in it
Right.
would be okay. Because a small non-residential facilities for educational, scientific, or nature interpretation purposes. Facilities isn't really defined.
And that actually, that definition, there is no definition of that, land use, in the code, so.
We don't have any performance standards on that one, but they, if in effect what all of this is a small non-residential facility for educational, scientific, or nature purposes,
Yeah.
then you can do it in resource
do it.
protection.
Yeah,
And you can even do it in the shoreland zone overlay.
yeah, exactly, right, yeah.
And so, but you're limited to one party in the RV.
Yeah, right.
Perfect.
That's it.
fine.
Yeah.
Why did we stop?
And then just from personal experience going through this process, I do have a business on my property. Whether or not like commercial comes into play in terms of employees and stuff like that. And I'm just putting that out there before you go before the planning board to make sure that like your buffering requirements and those types of things exist. Because if they deem it commercial, it's a different set of standards that are gonna have to be met.
I mean, there's been a business there for how many years?
Hundreds, footsteps.
I mean, 40 years, maybe, the farm.
It's a wonderful business, I have to say.
Thanks.
And,
he wasn't
it's
running it
great
at
to
his
have
house.
people undertaking these kind of endeavors in Durham.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
And I think everyone, from what I see of Durham in terms of people valuing outdoor recreation, local things, getting outside, supporting local agriculture, it's a wonderful thing.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So if, just to talk about this, because I will write something, because I think we need to, at least for the planning board's purposes, they need to understand what our
What your rationale were.
rationale for
So they don't say, hey,
That'd be
needing
great.
to do this.
what's going on
Yeah,
here?
yeah.
Why did they miss here? Yeah.
But I think that it's gonna say that, and I don't wanna kind of say, the board determined that they can do what they wanna do without this. I'm just gonna say why I think we need to make some, findings here. Like, that we,
Yes.
that we don't want, that, we're not going to, we could say a couple of things. We could say that in light of the legislative body's desire to evaluate resource protection zones, right?
Well,
Resource,
that, at the last town meeting, the
Yep.
voters did not accept the proposed changes to the resource protection zone. And that, the town is still working to determine exactly how the resource protection zone will be defined and for the voters to approve it. Something.
Yep. and that given the proposed use,
Yeah.
no boundary interpretation should be required.
No boundary interpretation, right, yep. Yeah,
That-
or that the use is currently allowed.
Yep,
The use, that's the main thing, the use is currently allowed, and.
and the proposed use is
And of
allowed.
course, it always gets to the question of, well, what is the use?
Right,
You
but
know,
that
but-
appears to, we could say appears to be allowed, and we're
maybe
not
just
evaluating
ba-
that.
Or maybe based on the information
Yeah.
that we have before us, because
Right.
they're gonna get way more in depth
Yep.
and they might.
Yeah,
find-
yeah,
Yep,
yeah.
yeah,
good,
they
good.
may find,
Yeah.
they may say, you know, you
And-
can't because of
You know, and
whatever,
you-
or Alan may, before you even go to them, put some criteria on what you might want to do.
We could cite two things. We
Yeah.
could cite the use that you mentioned, the educational,
Right.
and so cite that use. And you could also cite primitive recreation, given that this is not a campground and that
And not a campground. So three
Right, it's a
things.
camping site,
Yep.
yeah. So, you know, what are your thoughts, Barbara, with regard to denying the request versus taking no action? Should we deny the
Well-
request?
I think,
We have to.
We kind of have to, don't we?
yeah, I think we have to.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, we have to deny the quest, but it's more like a deny the quest because we don't think any action needs to be taken, given the proposed use as presented to us.
Yes, yep. I think that sounds reasonable.
But that's not what's being brought to us this evening. The proposed use is not being presented in this appeal. It's
It is.
It is,
It is in the.
we're not
It's just asking
approving the
for-
use. We're,
If you look on the other pages, they detail it.
It details what they want to do, but the variance is to seek an appeal to the existing zone. Not what they plan to do in that existing, in the zone. If we were to differentiate and approve what's a proposed zone versus an existing, then what they're gonna do with it comes into account, but we're not
I think
talking.
I think you could say both, Bill. I think you could say both, because this is currently being determined by town staff and the legislative body, what constitutes resource protection. Like, that's one reason why we're denying it.
Right.
And the other reason is, it appears that they can do what they want to do in the current zoning that they have.
We
I think
didn't
that
know
would
that.
cover all the
And
bases.
I think the reason to do that, Milt, is I think about all the times that, right, you don't want to just deny something. You want to help people do what they want to do and solve the problem. And so providing some guidance to people, it's not, the planning board may say that we're completely wrong, and you may fail to get your conditional use permit. So be it, but we're giving you some kind of guidance from how we look at the ordinance, which may or may not sway the planning board, but it I just think about how Gary always tried to do that, to make the.
Yeah, that's not the
Yeah.
point I was trying to make. I'm just
Okay.
trying to clarify why this board was called to session. It was to vote, and the vote was to vote on a variance, not on a proposed use.
It's not a
A
variance.
change, well, it's a change. It's
It's an interpretation. We're asked to vote, we're asked to reinterpret the resource protection, and we are and we may vote, we haven't voted yet. We're not,
We weren't
It's not
asked to
technically a
interpret.
variance.
It's not, yeah, but we weren't asked to interpret. We were asked to consider a proposed zone versus an existing zone. And that would determine what could be done in that zone. So we've made some recommendations as far as what they can do, so.
Right.
In the spirit of what you just said. But we were called to not make an interpretation, but to decide, can something be done based on a proposed zone versus the existing zone? And
So-
we're saying that we cannot,
Well, I think first we got to come up with a motion, and then
Right.
we bring it to a vote.
Right.
Because, I mean, we haven't voted yet.
So here's,
of course.
so what I would say is, I move that we, let's go right to, I'm gonna go to the language of the ordinance, because if the ordinance then gives us, let's go here. My page.
Deny the appeal.
Well, no,
of the
we're,
existing
so
zone.
because
Sounds harsh.
there are no, I would say this, I move that because there are no physical or cultural features existing on the ground that are a variance with the zoning map, because that's the argument you made. It's not like there's a physical feature on the ground. What we're looking at is a proposed location of a floodplain. That's not a physical feature on the ground.
Well, it is a physical, well, yeah, I mean, it's to be determined by like a survey or a floodplain delineator. It's not a
Okay.
physical feature, but it
So we
is a
can't-
feature.
It is a feature on the ground. Then we have to say if we're given the authority to reinterpret that,
Yeah.
right? Then the only reason that we're not approving this request is because we don't want to override the legislative body.
Yeah, I think that's it.
Okay,
That's the way I see it.
that's the motion.
That's in contradiction
Yeah.
Second,
to a current.
That we move that we move not, that it is not appropriate in light of the town meeting
Yeah.
to reinterpret the boundaries
Of
of
the
resource
resource
protection zone.
And you could add, in addition, there appears to be other ways of them
Yeah. I'll-
attaining their goals.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay,
shut that off.
you seconded it, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
You're gonna have to go backwards, because I'm not that quick.
Yeah, I'm not that fast either, but I'll have to look at the tape. I think I said, in light of the sentiment reflected by the legislative body at town meeting, the board is not going to reinterpret the boundaries of resource protection for the purposes of this request, something like that.
Right.
So we're denying the request.
Right, we are denying the request to do that interpretation, but the reason we're not denying it is not because we don't think we have the authority, it's because we don't want to undertake that authority. That,
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And do you have thoughts on the other piece with regard to, a friendly
Achieving their
amendment
goals.
to say
Yeah.
that we,
In
it
light-
appears that
Yeah.
there are other methods by which
right,
they can undertake, attain their goals.
Right.
Based on the information before
based on the
us.
information
Based on the
provided.
information we received, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Everybody okay with that? Can we hold a vote on the motion? And I'll write it up. Everybody in
Okay, yeah,
favor?
yeah, yeah.
Favor,
Okay,
yeah.
all those in favor.
All right. Can we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Who seconded that primary
I did.
motion?
The primary one?
The one after
Oh,
Barbara
that was Milt.
I second both of
No,
them.
that was Milton. Yeah, you second both.
All right.
and,
Good night,
Jane, regarding budget committee,
And,
were you
who
not
adjourned?
available on Monday? I know you said you preferred Thursday, but are you not available?
Grandchildren on Monday, I will be one vote by the end.
Milt seconded.
So is that a no, or you prefer not?
Wait, hold on, what?
It's,